He's an extension economist based out of Westaco. And his main topics today are going to be basically on the beef market outlook, which is going to be the first topic. And then he's going to move on to feeder cattle price determinants. So talking about the different factors affecting price in feeder cattle. And then he's going to finish up with PRF insurance, pasture range and forage insurance. So some good topics. We were not able to get somebody from the agricultural law department at A&M. I tried, trust me, and it just didn't work out. There was only one person, and that person was not available. But we got the best down here in South Texas, so we got Dr. Zapata. So we're lucky to have him, and he'll be speaking for till about noon or shortly before noon. So we appreciate that very much, Dr. Zapata. One other thing real quick I'd like to mention before I forget is there's another program coming up on July 2nd. It's a water conservation workshop. And Annette, our secretary, just emailed that out to everybody. It's going to be via Zoom, distance learning also, and it's part of the Texas Water Resources Institute, and Prairie View A&M, I believe, are putting on this program. So be sure to put that on your calendar. And I believe Victor Gutierrez is on. I don't know if you have anything else to share on that, Victor, before we get started. If not, then we'll go ahead and just keep that in mind again for that program. And with that, I guess I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Zapata so we can get started.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Marco, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure collaborating with you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Can you hear me well? Okay, great. So as Marco mentioned, today we're going to discuss 3 topics. First one, we're going to talk about briefly about the cattle market, what's the situation, and I'm going to give a particular emphasis to the coronavirus pandemic crisis and what had been the consequence to the food industry, and particularly to the cattle and beef industry. Then we're going to see how on the second presentation, how to add value to your cattle. Are there some specific characteristics that you can receive a premium, or there are some characteristics that you can avoid in order to prevent discounts at the sales? And the last presentation is I'm going to try to cover the PRF USDA insurance for forage and pasture. And if you are participating in that program, I hope that you can learn more about it. And if not, then it's something that you can consider to minimize your risk. So let's get started with the first presentation, the cattle market. Just give me a second. Okay, so before talking about the beef industry, it is important to know how important is agriculture to the state of Texas. And in this graph, you can see the total value of agriculture in Texas. We estimate that over $25 billion are generated by the ag industry in Texas. And it's not a surprise that the main share of the agricultural production in Texas is represented by the beef industry, particularly 36% of that $25 billion are generated by a beef cattle producer and their industry. So beef cattle is really important to Texas. So then I create this map. It's a kind of like a weird looking map of Texas, where as more important is cattle to a particular county, the larger or bigger that county is in this map. And when cattle is not that important in terms of value, you see that the counties are smaller. So it's not a surprise that the majority of the cattle industry in Texas is located in the north, in the Lubbock oh, sorry, in Lubbock as well is in the Amarillo area. So those are the top producing counties in terms of livestock production. So the presentation, I'm gonna try to focus the presentation or base the presentation on this economic principle of supply and demand. All over the news, we hear about supply changing or different factors that affect demand. And as economists, this is a traditional type of analysis that we do to see and try to understand the market and the market forces that are driving both the supply and demand. Those two concepts are very important and powerful because we can see and predict what's the price as well as the quantity that will be demanded and produced. We can see that changes in the supply will affect both the price and the quantity. External shocks, such as the coronavirus, can have a big impact on the supply, how much a particular industry can produce. New technologies also have a big impact on the supply. In the demand side, consumer preferences, they have been changing over time. Income is another driver of how much we demand, as well as the price of competitors' goods. So that's kind of, we're gonna try to cover both the supply and demand through the presentation. So in the next slide is the beef cattle supply change. This is a probably oversimplified version, but we know that everything starts with the cow-calf operation. Then you go to auctions, then to stocking operations, feedlots, processing the meat, then goes to the retailers or the supermarkets, and finally to the final consumers. So we can see that through the supply chain, there is a lot of information that goes in both directions. So something that happened at the consumer side will have an impact through the change, as well as something happened on the other part of the change will also have an impact on the consumer. And you can see, because this is a kind of like a complex production change, we see that there are different supply and demand components through the supply chain. So when something happens at one part of the change, that will have an impact forward and backward to the point that it happened. So just as an overview, this is the total cattle inventory in the US in a million heads. We see that the peak of the number of cattle in the country occurred in the 70s, and after that we have been seeing a trend, a downward trend, decreasing trend, where we had some peaks over time. So in the last cycle, we see that the cycle started around 2014. So the number of animals were increasing, consequently a higher supply. However, for the first time in the last 6 years, in 2020, we see that there are about 94 million heads. And for the first time, we see a decrease, a 0.4% decrease. So it seems that the total herd is start declining or reducing. So one of the drivers of this increase in cattle, but in livestock in general, is that feed, the price of feed has been low. And the main reason why corn particularly has been cheaper in the last year is because we have been producing more and more. So this is again a supply where we have a strong supply of corn, which makes feed, the prices of feed cheaper, and somehow that represents an increase in production of all the different livestock. Okay, let's talk about coronavirus. I'm sure that everybody is aware of the situation, but in this graph, this is the when the stay-at-home orders took place, and we see that starting in middle of March with California, and then little by little, more states were adding the same policy to the point that pretty much all the country was on stay-at-home orders. So what are the implications of that? Remember that we have two forces, the supply and demand. And in this case, if people are staying at home, they are consuming less. They are consuming less of everything, of every good, and also food. So that has some very important aspect to the beef cattle industry. So the first thing is that in this graph, there is the probability of a recession. This is used to trying to forecast when we're gonna enter a new recession. And you see that, for example, that was the last recession in 2008 with a probability of 100%. So mainly saying that we were there. So, but let's see what is happening now. So in 2020, we see that we have about 100% probability of enter a new recession. And that the implication of that is that when you have a new recession, you have you change your behavior as a consumer, because now you don't know what will happen in the future. So you start saving more money, start consuming less. Also, income is going down because many people are unfortunately losing their jobs. So that has some implication, and those are the ones that we're gonna try to cover this morning. So the first thing that is happening in 2020 is the personal consumption or expenditure, or basically how much do you spend on all the goods, has been going down with a sharp decrease, particularly 19% decrease on how much you are expending on everything, and that's include food. And remember, if you are spending less, so eventually the companies and will be selling less. And let's see, for example, what's the particular implication for food. And this to me is really interesting. So in this graph, we have how much as a country we are spending on food. And here I divide the food expenditures between the money that you spend on food that you will consume at home. That's the this orange yellow line, and the red line represent the money that you spend on food, but food that is consumed away from home. So basically restaurants, hotels, events, schools, those kind of things. And you see that over the year, there are some peaks, probably December, July, Thanksgiving, where we spend more money at home, and the opposite happen. If we spend more money at home on food consumed at home, eventually we consume less away from home. But let's take a look what's going on right now. And you see that the red line that represents food away from home decrease a lot, and the money that you spend on food consumed at home increase. So on average, for the last 30 years, of all the money that we spend on food, 53% is food that we will consume at home, and only 40% of food that we will consume away from home. But in March 2020, that changed to over 69% of all the money that we spend on food that will be consumed at home, and only 31% away from home. So that has some implication, because the industry, particularly the cattle industry, is really strong on food consumed away from home. So if you go to a restaurant, most people typically, when they go out to a nice restaurant, they will order a beef, a steak. So that's, and if people are consuming less at the restaurant, because most of the restaurants were closed, and also not only that, because people also are staying at home. So that had some implications to the food industry. So let's take a look of particularly to the beef or to the meat shortage that we have early at the coronavirus crisis. So first we start with a lot of different outbreaks of different employees at the processing plants were detected with coronavirus, and eventually what happened is that several plants for the main meat producer or packers in the country, those plants were closed. So what that means? That means that the supplies was hit heavily by this external shock. So basically we have a decrease in supply because those plants were closed. Those plants were producing less, or some of them were producing nothing during a couple of days. So we will see what were the implication of that a particular fact. So again, plants were closed during April, and you see that this is overall beef production in the country, million pounds. So typically we produce about 50 million pounds of beef every month or every week. But you see, for this year, at the beginning of the year, the demand for beef was really strong, and suddenly when the coronavirus crisis came to the country and we are having all these problems with the packing houses, you see that beef production that was about 570 million pounds went down in just a few days to pretty much half of that. So that was a big impact on the availability of beef that was produced. And over time, we will see that eventually we are recovering to a point that is pretty much what will happen before. But this part here is the shock created by the initial impact of the coronavirus. So we were producing less beef. What are the consequences of that into the price of beef that producers or that consumers are paying? And you see, and we all as a consumer, when we went to the supermarket during those days, we noticed that the price of beef was really high. And you can see that the prices were pretty much a little bit below the average. And then eventually, when the coronavirus crisis started, we see a huge peak in prices. Okay, this is the price, the kind of like the overall price of a carcass when you take into account the different cuts. So you see the prices double or a little bit more than that during a few days. And now when the when the production start coming back, you see that prices are declining to the point where we are at the average. But this was the moment of the crisis. So what are the consequences? Less cattle at the same thing. That effect of having when the plants were closed, that have a ripple effect through the supply chain. So cattle is slaughtered. You see that we were producing more beef. This is the number of heads in thousands that were slaughtered every week. So the number of animals, the beef production was really high. More animals were slaughtered every week, and then suddenly when the plants stopped producing, that went down, and now we see that we have this effect where the number of slaughtered animals are increasing over time to the point that we are a little bit higher than the average, and very similar to the numbers we saw last year. So it seems that at the least in this part, the industry is coming back to normal. Okay, so the price of a slaughter, you see what happened is that during a couple of weeks, those animals that were at the feedlot stayed there for a longer time, as we will see. So somehow at that point of the supply chain, we have a momentarily oversupply. So you see, it's not a surprise that the prices received by by the feedlots were lower than before, and we see this huge decrease in prices attributed to the fact that the demand for animals at the packing house level was lower. Okay, so the same happened with cattle. The first one was for steers. This is for cows, and we see more or less the same trend, with the difference that now the price of cows are a little bit higher. And my guess is that people are typically cows are used to for ground meat, hamburgers, and processing food. So if we are entering a recession, that has been seen in the past that consumers start demanding low quality cuts, which may result in an increase in demand for cows. Feedlot placements, okay? So how many animals were placed on the feedlot every month? And we see that during the pandemic crisis, few animals or less animals were placed on the feedlot, and that number is since April is going up. So during this time, you see that less animals were placed on the feedlot every month. So eventually that translates on less cattle on the feedlot. So you see, and remember, this is just the ripple effects. We see at the very end that less meat was produced, less animals were demanded. So the feedlot industry also respond by placing less animals, resulting in a lower number of animals on feedlot, and that is kind of recovering and going back to normal. However, you see that because those animals that were already on the feedlot before the pandemic crisis, they cannot go through a slaughter and then to the packing houses. So those animals stay longer on the feedlot, to the point that number of animals with over 120, it's well, the 120 is kind of like the mark. If you go past that, then your cost of production are really high because the animals tend to be larger. So you tend to try to keep it less than 120, but you see that 20 days on the feedlot, the number of animals that have been staying longer than that is increasing over time. So there is an oversupply that we have at that point of the change. So how that has been translated to feeder cattle producers. So we see at that point we were demanding, the industry was demanding less animals. So these are the prices, steer prices for animals between 500 and 600 pounds. And you see that the prices have been, before the crisis, prices were very similar to what they were last year. And after the crisis start, we see that a sharp decrease in prices. And eventually, my guess is that because less placement, feedlot, less animals on feedlot, so that create an oversupply of feeder cattle at that point, that in order to sell those animals, buyers, or in order also for them to buy, they were asking for a lower price. So you see that that's how that translates from closing the packing, the meat packing plants to the feed cattle producer, and that's how that ripple effects move through the supply chain. So export and imports are only important to the beef industry. In the first slide, let's cover the imports, and this is basically the 1 million pounds of beef and veal that we import every month. You see there is a tendency where during the summer we import more, and we see that the blue line represents 2020, and we are importing more than before. And after the pandemic crisis, we see that there is a reduction on the imports. Okay, so it is believed that we import about 50% of all the beef that we consume in the country. About roughly about 50% is imported. So, but where do we get that meat from other countries? And we see that our main partners to getting beef in the US or trading with the US is Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Mexico, and other Latin American countries like Brazil, Nicaragua, and Uruguay. So you see imports are pretty much a little bit lower than before. Let's take a look of the exports. Exports also of US beef were stronger before the pandemic, and then when the pandemic crisis started, we see a sharp decrease in exports. It's not a surprise, we were producing less beef as well. So where do we export the beef? And we see that the main partners are Asian countries, mainly with the new trade agreements that we have in place. Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, and China, Taiwan are the main buyers of US beef, primary high quality beef. And we have other countries like our neighbors, Mexico and Canada are also buyers of US beef. And if you see, pretty much the same quantity that we import is the same quantity that we export. So in beef, we have a balanced trade. So competitors are also very important on the demanding of any product. And in this case of beef, hogs and chickens or pork in this case, and poultry are substitutes of beef. So as a consumer, you try to diversify your diet and try to consume a different type of meat. And you see that in the case of pork, we see a huge increase in the production of pork or pig in this case, or hogs in the US. And you see that year after year, we are producing more and more pork. And most of that excess supply is exported to other countries. Chicken broilers placement, this is the number of million heads that are placed every week. And we see that not only beef suffer the consequences of the pandemic, the same pattern is observed in the other type of meat. Using chicken, higher placements before the pandemic, and after that, we see a huge decrease in the number of placements. We will see later in the presentation what have been the implications for that. But in general, beef has a strong competition from both the poultry industry and the pork industry. So this next slide, basically what I'm trying to show you is the overall production of meat in the country over time since 2020, since 2000 to 2020. And you see at the bottom, we see beef production. Over time, we see over the last 20 years, no big changes or increases on the amount of beef that we produce as a country. Pork, as we discussed, is increasing, but more or less is stable over time. And the big increase in meat production in the country is attributed to chicken. Okay, chicken is the fastest meat industry, the fastest growing meat industry, not only in the US, but also in the country. And you see that the main driver of this boom in the production of meat is attributed to chicken. Remember at the first slide, we discussed that we have a strong supply of corn, which make it cheaper to produce meat, in this case, chicken and all the other meat. So you see that beef has a strong competition from the other type of meat, particularly pork and turkey. So what are the some of the other aspects that we need to take into consideration is which meat is cheaper, which is more expensive. And it's not a surprise in this graph these are the retailer level. So basically that's the price that you pay as a consumer, which one is cheaper. And we see that over time, the price of beef, which is the blue line, has been increasing since 2004 to the end of last year. And we see that beef, once the first aspect is that beef is expensive, is more pricey than the other one. And to the point that right now, or at least before the pandemic, on average, we were paying about $6 per pound of meat. Pork also is increasing over time, the price of pork, but is lower than beef. And pork, we pay over more or less about a little bit less than $4 per pound. And we see that chicken has been more stable, the price of chicken over time, to the point that over the last 10 years, the price of chicken has been slightly going down to the point that we pay less than $2 per pound of chicken. So what are the implications of that? Probably this rank also, at least on my preference, this is the preference I have for meat. I go first, and I think most Americans go with beef, pork, and chicken. Okay, if you have money, that's basically how you allocate your money. But if we are in a recession where you have less money, then you need to be more careful with the money. And has been shown in the past that when you have less money, for example, during recession times, you start buying lower price cuts. Okay, so those expensive cuts that you used to buy for during the weekends. So now that there is a lot of uncertainty what will happen in the future, people in general go for lower price cuts. And one alternative for that lower price is pork and chicken. Okay, so the last slide that I have, one of the last slides is, this is what I'm trying to show you is how much meat we consume per capita. In the US, more or less, every American consumes about 200 pounds of meat every year. And you allocate those 200 pounds between the different options that you have. Let's take a look. In the 70s, beef used to be the most popular meat that we consume in the US. And about 82 pounds of beef were consumed in the 70s per person a year. And you see that that number has been going down over time to the point that now we consume 54 pounds of beef per year. On the opposite, you see that chicken in the 70s was not the favorite option or the first option for most Americans. But eventually, we changed from consuming 30 pounds of chicken in the 70s to consuming almost double, more than double, 77 pounds of chicken in 2018. And you see the pork consumption has been very stable, from 48 pounds in the 70s to only 47 pounds. So that extra pork that we produce, that is not consumed locally, but is exported. And you see then the other fish also, for example, from 12 pounds to 60 pounds, and lamb from 2 to 1. So you see the main substitution has been attributed to people consuming less beef and more chicken. And one of the reasons behind that is the big, as you can see on the previous slide, the big difference in prices between chicken and beef. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. This is my colleague, David Anderson, that is a livestock specialist economist. He's an economist. He tried to forecast what the prices for different sizes of feeder cattle or beef animals will be depending on the weight. And right now we are entering this the third quarter. And for the last quarter, a little bit higher prices are expected. However, those prices are lower than the prices that we had been observed in the previous quarters. So overall, those will be summarize my I think some of the most important topics that we discussed. The first one is that we are not living normal times. So I don't remember seeing that many restaurants closed, people staying at homes, problem with the packing plants. Right now we are reopening the economy, but at the same time we are imposing new biosecurity protocols that will have a big implication on both how consumers get their food. We see the trends that people are consuming more food at home compared to the restaurants, and also how the companies are responding to this new normal. Okay, what will be the impacts? We don't know. There is pretty much a fact that we're going to enter an economic recession, and that will have implication for everybody, not only for the meat industry. There is a lot of uncertainty. Nobody knows what will happen. Probably this is one of the first economic recession caused by a disease. Most of them were caused by other economic factors. And for sure, people will change their consuming or purchase habits. Okay, when you are in a recession, you don't know what will happen in the future. You tend to be more cautious about how to use your money. And for sure, we will see a decrease in demand for pretty much every commodity. And the impact of the COVID, I think, will last for a couple of a month or years, and that impacts will ripple through the market and through the economy, and pretty much affecting everybody in the planet. With that, I would like to see if you have any questions or comments that you would like to add.
Any questions out there for Dr. Zapata before we move on to the next presentation? I have one, I guess, real quick, Dr. Zapata.
Yes.
On the news, I guess, not too long ago, we were seeing like pictures of milk being dumped and like hogs being slaughtered, but not being processed or whatever. Just pretty much they're getting rid of their stock. Can you explain, I guess, like what was the reasoning, I guess, for that, or what?
Yes. It's not only that, we also see the same problem with vegetables. And the problem is not a demand problem, it's more a supply problem. And that's kind of related, that it was hard for the companies, for those different industries, to deliver their products to the consumers. So for example, in the case of milk, we see that we consume a lot of milk, but one of the main consumer of milk is the school systems in the US. Every kid every day receive at least 1 or 2 glass of milk every day, and there are millions of kids that attend school every day. And eventually, overnight, there was not that demand for milk. All the kids were staying at home. So what do you do with all that milk, extra milk that you cannot deliver to the grocery stores or find like an alternative use? So the problem was more on the supply part. The demand was stronger, even more probably higher than before, because people were what they were calling people were buying more than usual because they were afraid that there would be a shortage and all that. So the demand was strong. However, the supply was having problem delivering that product to the final consumers. And keep in mind also that most agricultural products, they have a short shelf life. For example, milk, you cannot have it for a longer time, or vegetables. When you harvest the vegetables, you need to be able to deliver those vegetables in a fast way to consumers. However, if that was not the case, there were a lot of restrictions. Restaurants also were closed, and we see that we consume pretty much 50% of the money we spend it at restaurants and in other places outside home. So that those were the main bottleneck of the supply chains. It was hard to deliver those products to final consumers.
The slaughter plant closures too, I guess, didn't help that. I mean, that as well.
Yes, at least for that they can frozen the meat and then deliver it later on. But for other ones, it was harder to do that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Any questions out there for Dr. Zapata?
Well,
not, then we'll go ahead.
You want me to move to the next one?
Yes, sir.
Let me. Just give me 1 second.
So the next session is going to be feeder cattle price determinants. I guess factors affecting feeder cattle prices.
Okay, let me look for that presentation. Okay. Just let me see. I'm having some trouble finding that presentation. Can you see my screen or not?
Not yet. No. Just
not yet.
I see you right now.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Feeder cattle?
Yep, we got it.
Okay, excellent. So for the last presentation, we're going to see how, if it is possible to add value to the feeder cattle prices that you receive. It is well known that there are some attributes that receive a premium, and some attributes that are discounted at the auction sales. So in this study, what we are trying to see if there is a really differential, what we call a price determinant characteristics that really drive the price that you receive. And you see in this first slide, do you think that all those animals worth the same? They are really different color, different size, different condition, different breeds. And the question is, no, they don't worth the same, and they don't worth the same because they are different. So what we are trying to see is what are the difference that create a positive premium or a price increase, and what are the difference that create a price discount. Okay, so basically that's what we are doing. So let's give you an overview of the program. So basically the program, what we are trying to do is to estimate those value add management and marketing practice that can generate additional value to South Texas producers. And again, those practices or those premiums are based on market preferences. So to do this study, what we did is that we are using what we call a hedonic approach. And basically a hedonic approach is a well-known economic analysis where it is based on the assumption that the price that you receive for a good or a service is a function of the attributes or characteristics of that good. So different characteristics or different attributes will generate a different price. And then you can use some statistical techniques to recover the differentials of the prices. In the case of the feeder cattle, we are collecting data on different characteristics. For example, the color of the animals, the sex, the muscle score, hair, horns, Brahman influence, among other characteristics that we are gonna discuss today. And we are seeing, okay, how those characteristics are related to price, okay? Which one are associated to higher prices and which one are associated to lower prices. So for this particular study, we had been collecting data since 2014 to 2019. This year has been hard with all the pandemic to collect data, but overall we have about 7,000 observations of individual cells. So we record over 7,000 animals from 12 auction bars in South and East Texas. So how do we collect the data? There are county agents that go to the sales during the sales days to the auction bars, and they collect the data for a random number of animals. So what we are trying to do for every sale day, we collect about at least a minimum of data on 30 animals. So we collect the price, the weight, and all the other characteristics that we are recovering. So we have I think a large data sets, and it is important that it goes through over a couple of years. So I would like to thank all the agents that have been participating on this study, and that's the list of some of the agents that have been collecting data on a regular basis for this project. And this is the red dots represent the auctions where we are collecting data. We used to be collecting data in the star auction, livestock auction. However, I think that they closed, but how you see, we are collecting data in South Texas as well as East Texas. So we have data from 12 different auction sales. Let's show you some preliminary results of the analysis. So the first one is, this is kind of like a big picture of the data we have in the variables or the characteristics that we are collecting data. So you see the first one is the color or the pattern of the hide, and you see that most of the animals in South Texas, are black. About 31% of all the animals that we have on record, those are black animals. So sex is more like a kind of like a well distributed with a higher proportion of heifers that we have in our data set. About 42% heifers, 39% bulls, and 28% steers. We also collect data on the frame size, and you see here that medium frame is the most popular, followed by large frame, where we have about 31%. We also collect data on field, and most of the producer condition their animals before the sale to about 74% have an average field, 22% a full field, and shrunk. Only 3% of the animals were on that condition. Body score, condition, we see that most animals, about 78%, are also are average. That we had fleshy 30%, and thin animals only about 8%. Muscle score, score number 2, about 57% of the animals are on that particular score. And we also collect data on the Brahman influence. So we have pure non-Brahman, 25% of the data represent that. Then we had some 25% cross, 50, 75, and 100% Brahman is a low portion, and we will see what they are later on, and it's about less than 3%. And we see also that dehorning the animals is a well practice in South Texas, where about 72% of all the animals that we have on record go through that particular process. The weight in 100 pounds, about 546 pounds. That's the average weight of the animals we have on record, and the average price is $1.63 per pound. So that's kind of like the big picture of the data set. We have, I believe we have a well-representative data set, and based on that, let's see what are the discounts or premiums that we have been observing for each of those attributes. So first, how we do that? Again, we use a hedonic regression. Basically, this is a statistical analysis where we are able to separate the effects of each attributes, and how the data or how the analysis is used or interpreted is being what we call a ceteris paribus, or other characteristics or other aspects being equal. So basically what we're gonna see, the premiums and discounts are saying, okay, two animals that are identical, however, they only have one characteristic that is different between them, and that difference create that particular price differential. So let's start with the trend, the price trend. So we start collecting data early in 2014, where prices were in general going up, but after that, middle of 2015, you see prices has been more or less going down. So this graph represents all the data that we have on record, and each bar pretty much account for 50% of the data for that particular day. Okay, then we see some outliers, so some animals that receive a premium, but also we see at the bottom of that we have some animals that were heavily discounted at those particular dates. Okay, and also there is important to know that there is a lot of variability. Okay, it's not that there are many factors affecting a price. So the first one is time of sale. What's the time of sale? And the question that we were trying to answer is there is a difference between months. Okay, if you sell the same animal in January, compared if you sell it a month before, will you receive the same price? And the questions that we have, and the answer that what we found is no, there is a difference between prices. And you see that in general, the first thing is that the shortest bar represent the baseline. So in this case, January. So compared to selling an animal in January, if you sell it, the same animal in February, you will receive a 9 cents or $9 per 100 pounds premium just by selling the animal 1 month later. And we see that the highest prices were observed in January, February, and March. Okay, so 9 cents higher than January, 6 cents higher than January if you sell the same animal in March. After March, we see that on average, you start receiving a discount. Okay, probably these are the months when we have the highest supply of animals. And that price discounts start increasing over time to the point that in December, you receive a 62-cent discount, saying on average for the same animal that you will sell a month later. So it is possible to sell your animals at the beginning of the year, and if you are able to do that, then on average, you will receive a higher price. So the next one was color. Is color important? And in this case, we assume that the base color is for a black animal. We assume that the black animal is typically associated with Angus, a black Angus, and those animals receive a premium. And we see that compared to a black animal, those that hadn't a star means that they are the same. So all those color, all that range of color, statistically is receive the same price as a black animal, and that include smoky, brindle, white, black, gray, and this is red with a white face. So all those animals receive more or less the higher price, the same price. Which one receive a higher price? We see that a black animal with a white face receive a premium as well as a dun animal. Keep in mind that those colors are also related to a particular breeds, okay? It's not the color, but there is something else. And the most interesting is that animals with spots, they are heavily discounted in the market, 60 cents, okay? This is associated to some particular breeds that are not that well accepted in the market, okay? So just keep in mind that there are some difference in color. Remember that again, the buyers will buy the animals based on the characteristics that they can see and on the potential that they can see on each animal. So frame, here we see that frame, we have the small, medium was the baseline, and large. And statistically, we don't see any difference on frame. So statistically, there is no difference. However, when you take the average of that, small animals are discounted only 2 cents. Okay, so that difference is not any statistical difference. Frame, we don't see. Other studies has shown some preference for large animals based on the assumption that a larger animal have a higher weight gain rate, as well you can put more meat on those larger animals. But here, at least in South Texas, on the data we have, we don't see a differential. Field, basically, field is a snapshot of the condition of the animal at the, or the size of the rumen as of the sale day. And here we see that full animals receive somehow a premium, and those animals, strong animals, are heavily discounted, probably because they are associated with a poor management, or those animals may be associated that will be sick or have some problems that will prevent them to fully show their potential in the next step of the change. Next one is a condition. Here we see particularly a premium compared to average. Fleshy animals receive about a $2 premium per 100 pounds compared to an average animal. In condition, thin animals are discounted again, about 4 cents per pound. So if you can do something to improve the condition of your animals, you can do it. Keep in mind that it's not only having or receiving a higher price at the end. What you want is to create some profits, and you need to put, it's a trade-off between the price that you receive and the money that, or the cost that you will have. So muscle score, again, muscle score number 1 and 2 are preferred compared to, there is no difference between muscle score 1 and 2. And those two muscle categories are preferred than the number 3, okay? So the more muscle an animal has will receive a premium. So if you can do some select your animals for that particular characteristic, then on average, you will receive higher prices. Sex, it is well known that the steers, in this case, the reference was at the base was a bull. So in a steer on average receive 4 cents higher price than a bull. And that's a statistical difference. And heifers, they are discounted about 9 cents per pound. So you see there is a substantial difference. just by the sex of the animal. And here the question will be if castration worth or not, and that pretty much will depend to every producer. If you see that this price differential is enough to do that practice, then I think it's a good idea to do it, okay? And bulls somehow are not preferred because of their temperament. So Brahman, that's kind of interesting. You see that what we see first is that pure non-Brahman animals were discounted 5.5 cents on average per pound, and 100% Brahmans were also discounted 50 cents in South Texas. And we see that the market or the buyers were preferring animals with 25% and 50% Brahman. Okay, we all know that Brahman gives some characteristics that make the animals more resistant or more tolerant to the condition of South Texas. So those attributes are something that buyers are looking. And then we see, okay, let's try to see if there is a sex Brahman effect. Okay, what happens if you have a female Brahman? Are they discounted or not? And we see that we have in our data set some pure female Brahman heifers, and those animals receive a higher premium, 20 cents premium compared to non-Brahman heifers. So you see also some, and those probably those animals are used as replacements, and that's the reason why buyers are willing to pay a premium for those animals. So horn animals, the horn animals are discounted 4 cents per pound. So again, this is something that you need to check and see if does it worth to do it or not based on the discount that you will receive or the premium versus the cost of doing that practice. And one of the main drivers of price differential is the weight of the animal. So you see here, every dot represents an animal in our data set. So we have here the weight, 500 pounds, 1,000 pounds, and here you have the price. And you can clearly see a trend that lighter animals on average receive a higher price compared to heavier animals. Okay, so the heavier, the bigger the animal is, the lower the price that the animal will get. So I create this line basically just to see what's the difference is. If you increase, what will be the loss or the gain that you will have. For example, the baseline is a 650 pound animal. If you put, saying, 150 pounds more to that animal, you will be discounted about 12 cents per pound if you put that extra weight to the animal. And also the opposite happen if you sell that animal earlier, you will receive a higher price, a $12 price. Here you need to keep in mind that it's not the price per pound that you are looking, but the price per animal. So probably here, what you need to do and check if here I will receive a lower price, however, my animal will be heavier, so I will receive a higher return compared to here, where I have, here I receive a higher price, however, my animal is lighter. So you need to see which one of the two options is best for you. With that, the final thought for this presentation, the first one is, again, this is a trade-off between price and cost. You don't want to be the producer who receive the higher prices. You want to be the producer who makes the more money possible. Okay, at the end, you are here in the business for making money, not for receiving the higher prices. And most of those characteristics, the price is associated with a higher cost. So you need to see which of the two options is better for you. And on average, we see that January and March animals that were sold January and March receive a premium compared to the other months. Spot animals are heavily discounted in the market. Full and fleshy animals receive a premium. So if you can do that, a preconditioning of your animals, you will receive a premium. But again, you need to see if that works or not. Score number 3 are discounted. So skinny animals or thin animals are discounted. Steers are preferred and heifers are discounted too. And we see that 25 to 50% Brahman receive a premium, and horns are not a desirable attribute. And the last one is that, as we see on the data, that the price that you receive decrease with the weight. So you need to find what's the optimal weight for your animals to compensate the cost. And with that, I will conclude the second presentation. If you have any question or comment about this one.
Hey, Dr. Zapata, this is Victor.
Hi, Victor.
Hey, I have a real quick question, and maybe I might have missed it in the very beginning, but these stats are towards South Texas animals or animals throughout the state?
No, those are for South and East Texas. So basically, we are collecting data from those 12 auction sales. You see 6 in South Texas and 6 in the East region.
Okay.
So those that analysis is valid for those 2 regions, for on the South and the East.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Zapata? Real quick, I just wanted to reiterate, I did the market report for a few years over at the Edinburgh Livestock Auction. It's probably been about 10 years, but everything he mentioned was true, you know, about of course, you know, with increasing weight, the price goes down, the color of the animal had a lot to do with it. The body condition, everything like that just plays a big role in the price that the animal is going to get. So I witnessed it personally, and that is definitely things to look out for to get, you know, better prices in your livestock at the auction.
Yes. I think especially in this during this time of lower prices, if you can do something just to increase the price that you receive, that's something that can make the difference, particularly during lower prices. So those are practices that you need to consider. If they work for you, then you need to look for them, because during these tough moments, what you want to do is try to make the marketplace against your favor. So this is an option that you can do to at least receive a higher price compared to other producers.
Yes, sir. Any questions? Any other questions for Dr. Zapata? If not, we'll go ahead and transition to the last session, or section, I should say, which will be on PRF insurance. And that'll be the discussion for the next session.
Okay, let me share my screen for the last one. Can you see it?
Yes.
Can you see it full screen?
Now we do, yes.
Okay, excellent. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the PRF, but this is a USDA program that has been in place since 2007. So it's a relative new insurance program. However, it's a little bit different too. It's new and it is different than the traditional crop insurance, for example, for corn, cotton. So the goal of this one will be to try to explain how this program works. And it is for, as the title say, this is for pasture, range, and forage. So that's the only insurance available for basically for hay production and grazing. So we're gonna start by pretty much giving you an overview of the program, how's the program, how it works, and if you are participating in the program, I hope you can have a better idea and improve your decision. If you are not familiar with the program, probably this is something that you can start thinking about it and see again if it works or if it's fit your needs or no. And I'm gonna conclude the presentation by the decision aid tool that I am working on and I'm gonna show you some preliminary results. If you have any questions, please stop me and ask me questions. This is a little bit more technical presentation. However, I will try to explain it to the best of my capabilities. So let's start with the PRF program. So the PRF program is basically based on the assumption that rainfall or rain is the main limiting factor for grazing and forage production, okay? And the idea is basically if we had plenty of rain, you will have a good yield, you will do well. However, if we don't have rain, forage and hay producers or grazing producers won't do that well. So there is a huge risk because unfortunately compared to the other, for example, the previous presentation, we cannot control the rain, okay? We don't have pretty much no control of how much it will rain or not. So the first slide is the average since 1948 to 2019, how much rain we have every month in the valley, in the 4 counties in the valley. And you see most of the rain, we have it during the months of May and June, and then the peak of the rain, we have it in September, okay? And then there are some other months, for example, March has the lowest range on average. And the bars represent the variability or the standard deviation of that rain. And we see that there is a huge variability. For example, in September, on average, the rainfall can go up to 8 inches per month or as low as less than 2 inches. So there is a lot of risk variability, and the program, the goal of this insurance is to minimize that risk, okay, of rain. So how did it work? So the PRF is again an USDA RMA program, and it's an area-based insurance, okay? Area-based means that the payments that you receive are not based on your own operation, but on an area assigned by a grid, okay? So basically the USDA creates these grids, and then you need to allocate where your operation is on that grid, and you will receive a premium or a payment based on the conditions of that grid. And we will see later on the presentation that even the condition of the particular grid are not measured with 100% accuracy, okay? So again, it is an area based, it's not based on your operation, but on a particular grid. So the USDA or this PRF use a precipitation system and basically divides the country in grids. And each grid is a 17 by 17 miles. Okay, it's a square, 17 by 17. And as a producer, you need to assign the grids or select the grid based on where your location is. So this is, for example, the grids for South Texas, and you see on average, all of those grids are 17 by 17 miles. So for example, if your operation is in this location, then you will be assigned to the 7630, or if you are in that operation, you will assign it to that a particular grid. There are some grids, for example, this one that are bordering Mexico. If they are, for example, this one that more of the area of the grid is in Mexico, or those grids that more of the area is out in the water, or this one, those grids are not allowed to participate on the program. So if your farm is located on those specific grids, you won't be allowed to participate on the program. So for the exercise of this presentation, we're gonna focus on the grid 7329. And why that one? Because that's where the AgriLife county office is located, the district office. And there we had some weather station. And on the future, I plan to use that information to validate the information provided by this particular insurance. So again, the PRF use a rainfall index, okay? It's not the precipitation that we had per se. So that precipitation is transformed into an index, and we will discuss that index before. And the data to create the index is provided by the NOAA, that is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Climate Prediction Center. So they collect data, as we will explain you, and they are collecting data, or at least for this program, since 1948, okay? And the rainfall index is calculated for each grid and for each interval. And we will talk about that because the program divides the year between 2 months intervals, okay? So how the data is collected, how this index, because all the program is based on the index. If the index is below, as I will explain you, if the index is lower than average, you will receive a payment. And if the index is higher than average, you won't receive a payment. So first, here is the number of weather stations that are in the country that are participating or that are used to collect data about rainfall in the country. You will see in the valley, we have a lot of weather stations that are providing data to this system. So let's see, for example, this is the grid, a particular grid, okay? And on your grid, there are 4 weather stations, okay? So what the program does is that they try to forecast what will be the rainfall at the center of the grid, okay? And they have to use at least 4 weather stations. The closer you are to the closer that weather station is to the center of the grid, the more importance they give to that. So again, that's why some producer that are participating in the program complains, because assuming that your farm is located in this part, you have no weather station there, probably you have a lot of rain, and those other location has no rain or can be the opposite. So basically, that's why it is not based on your own experience, but on the average experience of the grid, okay? So that's why you can receive a payment even if you had really good rainfall, or they can be the opposite where you have no rainfall and receive no payment because on average, on other location on the grid, the weather conditions were better. So how the rainfall index works, so they say, okay, the average of the rainfall from 1948 to 2018, we will give to the average 100 index, okay? So if an index is below 100, it means that the rainfall for that particular month was lower than the average. So for example, a rainfall index of 90 means that your grid received 10% lower rainfall than the historical mean. And if it's higher than 100 means that you receive higher rainfall. For example, 115 means that you receive a 15% higher rainfall than the mean. And again, remember that the payments, as I show you, will be based on the index, okay? The lower the index, the higher the chances that you will receive a payment. So index is correlated to rainfall. The higher the rainfall that you have in a particular year, the higher the index. And again, 100 is the average index. So then what they do is that they divide the year between 11 intervals, okay? You have 2-month intervals, January, February, then you have February, March, March, April, April, March, and you see those are 2 months. So then as a producer, you need to select the intervals that you will use to participate in the program, and you cannot have overlapping. For example, if you pick January, February, you cannot pick February, March, because on the first interval that you choose, February was already covered, okay? So you need to be really wise about what intervals to use. So let's see, for example, for the grid that we're gonna use as an illustration, 7329. Okay, so this is, here you have the rainfall index. 100 represent the average index that you have, 100%. And you see the blue bars is the index that we had for this year, 2020. And you see, it's not a surprise that we have an index of less than 20 because this has been a really dry year. And the same happened with 2019. For every interval, you see all of them were below the average, okay? However, this is the last 5-year average index. So for some months, February, March, on average, the index is higher than the mean. However, for during the summer, May to September, on average, the index is lower than the mean. So as a producer, you need to select which of those intervals will you use to participate in the program. There are other parameters as well that you need to select. First, you need to know where your grid is located, if you're gonna use the insurance for haying or grazing, then if you have irrigation or not, if your production is organic or not. Then a key variable is the coverage level. The coverage level you can select between 70 to 90%. Productivity factor, there is a value saying, okay, for haying in your county is 70, the value per acre is $77. That's how much you can insure. But however, if you are a higher producer, you can go increase that number up to 50%, or you can also reduce the number up to 60%. Okay, and then the other important characteristics is the index interval. So basically, to every interval, you can only allocate a minimum of 10% and a maximum of 50%. Okay, for the interval you have, for those 11 options, you need to allocate 100% to those 11 options with a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 50% to each of them. So premium, there is a subsidy. The higher the coverage level that you have, the lower the subsidy that you will receive. For example, at the 90% coverage level, you receive a subsidy of 51%, which means that you only pay 49% of the total of the true value of the insurance. If you're a coverage level of 70, you pay only 41%, okay, and the rest is paid by the federal government. So the level of coverage that you pick has an impact on the subsidy that you will receive. Some important dates to participate on the program is that you pay the premium for participating in the program until the next year. So in this case, if you decide to participate on the 2020-2021 program, you will pay until September of last year. And the other important date to keep in mind is that you need to make your selection before August 31st of this year if you want to participate on next year. And the policy goes from cover the entire 2021 year from January 1st to September 31st. Okay, so let's see an example. Again, remember, you will receive a payment only if the final grid is lower than the coverage level that you receive, okay? For example, if you have a coverage level of 90 and you have a final index of 75, then you will receive a payment, okay? So keep in mind that one. So we're gonna focus on the grid that we have been discussing, and as an illustration, we're gonna use last year data for the program. We're gonna assume that you have 100 acres. You are using those acres for haying, and it is irrigated. So the coverage level that you pick is 80%. Productivity factor, you stay with 100% or with the value assigned to the county. And here is the important thing. Which intervals are you using? So you decide to use March, April, May, June, July, August, and September, October, and you assign 25% to each of them. Okay, so again, this has to add to 100%. So it's up to you how you will allocate it. Okay, and that's the key to the program. So let's see an example. So we have the first one is that we have our coverage level of 80%. Okay, that's the index value. We say, okay, we're gonna go with a 80% coverage level. If for the months or for the intervals that I'm picking, if the rainfall index for 2019 is lower than that, I will get a payment. However, if it's higher than that, I won't get a payment. So we start with January, February, that was lower. However, you didn't select that one, so it's irrelevant for you. February, March, same thing. You didn't select it, so it's irrelevant. So the next one, March, April, that's the one that you select in 2019, it was about 70% the value. So it was lower than 80. So that's good for you because you will receive a premium, indemnity for this particular month. So April, May, you cannot select it. Then you select May, June, and you see May, June, the index was higher than 80. So you won't receive a payment for that particular interval. So far you have one interval that you will receive a payment and the other one that you won't receive a payment. This one is irrelevant to you. The next one was good. You see last year, July, August, we have a really low rainfall, really dry month. And then you will receive a indemnity, and that indemnity will be higher than this one because your index was lower. The final index was lower than your coverage level. Then September, August, September is irrelevant to you, and the last interval that you picked was September, October, and that one was also lower than the 80% coverage level or threshold. So far, what you will see is that you will receive payment for 3 intervals, and for this one, the second one, you won't receive a payment because it was higher than the coverage level that you select. So those are the formulas on how to estimate the indemnity. We won't go through that. However, it will be available for you. The important, or what I want to show you here, is that the parameters there are three key parameters that you need to select. First one is the percent of value, or basically how much you assign to each interval, the coverage level, and the productivity factor. Okay, and you see that those three parameters that you need to select as a producer have an impact on the payment factor, have an impact on the indemnity payment, on the premium that you pay. Remember, again, the coverage level depends on the premium rate as well on the subsidy, and then finally on the net return. So the decisions that you take about the percent of value, the coverage level, and the productivity factor will play an important role on how much money will you receive at the end of the year. Unfortunately, there is no program that can tell you how to allocate or how to select those three options, and that's basically what I am working on, trying to provide at least some extra information for you to pick the three options that are better for you. So continue with the example. Those are the 4 months that the fourth interval that we pay. Those are the value from the previous formula. And you see that the net return for the first interval, we get $52. The second interval, we didn't get any. In fact, we paid the premium and didn't receive anything. However, for July, August, that was when we have the greatest difference, we received $832. And for September, October, $61. So for this particular illustration, you receive a net return of $811, and you pay $623 in premium. So for every dollar that you pay, you receive $2.30. So it was good for you, because for every dollar that you pay as a premium, you receive back $2.30. So how popular is this program in the Valley? So in 2020, for this year, there are over 400,000 acres participating in the program in the Valley. The program started in 2007 with a low participation. However, over time, that has been increasing in the Valley year by year. And you see that the most popular, this program is really popular in Starr County, Cameron, and Willacy. Oh, sorry. Starr, Cameron, Hidalgo, and Starr. Cameron is not that popular. You see that over time, Cameron is the county with the lowest number of participating acres compared to Hidalgo, Starr, and Willacy. But again, you see a lot of acres that are participating in the program. So the other interesting thing is the loss ratio. Again, loss ratio is basically the total money or indemnity that you get by participating in the program divided by the premium or by the money you pay. And you see that over time, if it is greater than 1, it means that producers on average receive more than what they pay. So that has been a good insurance for them. The only exception was in 2015, where producers pay $1 to participate in the program and receive back on average only 63 cents. This was 2015 was a really wet year with a lot of rain. So for most of the intervals, the rainfall index was higher than the mean. However, you see, for example, when we have 2011, 2012, when we have dry years, that's when producers get the higher because the rainfall was below that. But on average, here in the Valley, producer will get more as an indemnity than what they pay for the program. So with that, let me show you some preliminary decisions about how to assist producer on taking the better decisions on how to participate on this program in a more effective way. So the first concept or concepts that we need to discuss are the expected value and risk. Expected value, basically those two concepts are related to uncertainty. For example, we don't know what the rainfall will be next month. Nobody knows. So it can be higher, it can be lower. So depending on that, you will make different options, different selection of the intervals. And each selections may have higher variability or different variability. For example, in this example, you see that the expected value or the mean of these three options is the same. They have the same expected value. So on average, they will perform the same. However, the variability or the risk of each of them is very different. For example, the red line represents an option with low variability, lower risk. However, for example, the green line represents an option that on average will yield the same. However, the probability of having a different result is higher. And that's what happens. So basically, as a producer, you need to select those three characteristics. You need to pick a coverage level, can go from 70 to 90. You can produce, you need to pick a productivity factor that goes from 60 to 150. There you have 91 options. And then you need to pick the intervals without having a overlapping. And there you have 11 options. So we did the math, and the total number of options or possible combinations that you can have as a producer is really over 100,000 possible combinations. So it is not feasible to evaluate all of those combinations. So saying, okay, what will be my outcome if I do this one, if I do that one? So there is a lot of combination, and this big number doesn't take into account how much a percent of value you will assign to each interval. So the idea of this decision tool will be to facilitate the evaluation of all the possible combinations to local producers so they can pick a better decision for the program. And this decision aid tool is based on a well-known economic concept that is called portfolio theory. That's basically the same theory that is used by investors. So as an investor, you can put your money on different assets, bonds, federal, international bonds, local bonds, and then you combine those bonds with the idea to protect you from the market risk. And we use the same concept by picking the best interval that will minimize the risk. So here on the vertical axis, you have the expected return, how much money you are expecting to receive by participating on the insurance. And here is the risk, okay? Not necessarily what you expect is what you're gonna get. So there is a chance that you can get more, but also there is a chance that you can get less. So first we're gonna see is that we estimate all what we call all the efficient portfolios or the efficient frontier. That efficient frontier is a set of the best options that you can have for expected return and risk. So for example, let's consider that we decide to go with this specific combination or this portfolio. There are two alternatives or three alternatives compared to this one, okay? So if you compare this alternative, the one that is efficient, between this one that is not efficient, we see that these two have the same return, okay? Same level of return. However, this alternative have a higher risk compared to this one. So if you have to decide between two options that on average will yield the same, but one is has more risk, you will, if you don't like risk, probably you will go with an option that give you a less risk. And how this one compared to this one, you see, they have the same level of risk, both has the same level of risk. However, this one has a higher return to this one. So by the same level of risk, a rational investor will pick this one because for the same level of risk, you can have a higher expected return. And this one, how you compare this one to this one, is obvious that this one is better because this one has a higher return and also have a lower risk. So basically what we are trying to do with this decision tool is to estimate all the combinations of those over 1,000 combinations that are in this line, okay? And then it's up to the producer to decide which one to pick. Just keep in mind that the higher the return that you have, the higher the risk, okay? If you want to go with a higher return, you need to take more risk compared if you go with a lower return option, you have lower risk. And this is basically what I'm trying to do. So this is the efficient frontier. The blue line represents the efficient frontier for this grid, the 78329 in 2019. So basically this is the efficient frontier. All the efficient portfolios are in that line, and the red line represent the return that a farmer will have if they decide to use this tool. And you see that on average, all the farmer in this grid will receive a higher return than expected by using the portfolio. So you see the higher the return, the higher the risk. And then the other one that is what most farmers are trying to select is how to allocate the percent of value among the 11 options. And you see that this is for each expected return, the best combination of the shares or the value that you need to allocate. And you see that what the program does is try to diversify the risk by putting a weight to 6 intervals. In this case, they are picking January, March, April, May, June, July, August, as well as September, October, and November, December. And you see that as you move to the higher returns, the less the number of intervals that you use that generates higher returns, but at the same time, they provide more risk. So the other thing that we notice is that the coverage level, the optimal coverage level, if you decide to stay with low return, low risk option, you stay with a lower coverage level as well as a lower productivity factor. However, as you increase your expected return, you need to increase your coverage level up to 90 as well as the productivity factor to the maximum of 150. So basically here with this tool, we provide data, or at least an option, a guideline to producer on how to decide depending on their risk preferences. And with that one, just for you to be aware, there are also USDA decision tools available. They don't give you suggestion on how to use the program. Is more rather than to evaluate any decision that you are considering. With that one, if you have any question or comment about this program, let me know.
Any questions for Dr. Zapata? Okay. I guess not. Well, we appreciate it very much, Dr. Zapata. He's our extension economist over in Westaco. Very good information. 3 really good topics that you discussed.